When you get to a certain degree of fame, the odds of someone mentally ill tuning in to watch you increases. And one of the most mentally ill type of viewer is the one who would stalk you. Unfortunately, this happens to all sorts of celebrities, but the creepiness level and danger level of a stalker can vary greatly. It typically involves someone breaching every aspect of your privacy. It can be due to obsession or just straight up delusion, thinking that they're owed that because they're such big fans of you or that you secretly want it. Both equally as creepy. But this is all nothing. Yes, this is all nothing compared to what occurs in Japan, because in Japan, you don't have to be famous to have stalkers. As this article puts it, Japan has a stalking epidemic. Even the average person can suffer through this. In fact, one quick Google search with Japan stalker as the keywords, and you'll see Reddit threads of foreigners complaining about being stalked. And many people in the comments can corroborate this. They agree, they've had their own experiences and they're talking about them. A few years back, there was this story about this normal, average foreigner, right? Not famous in any capacity, talking about her stalking experience. Many people couldn't believe it. They couldn't even begin to imagine how crazy this is. I'll show you a few seconds so you can understand. Watch.
You know the freakiest thing about living in Japan? As a woman, you get stalked.
I just woke up to something that I really hope no one else has to wake up to. My peephole was just pushed out of my door.
Do you understand now? This is horrible. And again, not famous in any way. She's just a normal person living there, minding her own business. And yet, there's someone knocking down her peephole so that they can look through and see her private quarters, where she lives, where she should have privacy. This is what many people call the dark side of Japan, a side of Japan that no one really talks about. But it's very much there. And that's something that ex-idol and cosplayer Keekihime had to find out about the hard way. She's someone who fell in love with Japan as a teenager, and a huge passion in her life was to integrate herself in their culture while practicing things she loves like cosplaying. What she couldn't have ever guessed, though, is that out of all her fans, one of them in particular, a Japanese man way older than her, would make it his life's mission to stalk her for over 10 whole years. And on August 12th, 2024, very recently, there was a massive turning point. He ended up doing something to her in front of hundreds of people that most stalkers in Japan would never even dare to do, emotionally scarring her for life and making himself the Japanese internet's public enemy #1. Let's talk about it because it's absolutely crazy. Out of all the videos I've made so far talking about a number of people, I would argue that Keekihime's background is one of the most unique I've ever seen. She was born in Austria, and her introduction to Japanese culture was actually a video game gifted to her by her mother called Tales of Symphonia. She didn't want to play it herself, she had her brother play it, and watching him play it made her realize, wow, I'm really into Japan and its culture, I want to know more. She ended up wanting to learn the Japanese language, but didn't want to do it the traditional way. She wanted to do it by talking to actual Japanese people. So in 2010, when she was just 15 years old, she started uploading dance covers and live streaming herself on the website Nico Nico. Now Nico Nico, a lot of people call it Japanese YouTube. YouTube is definitely more popular, especially today, but back then Nico Nico still had a huge chokehold on Japanese internet traffic. Many of its functions today are outdated or done already, but back then it was innovative in the way it handled live streaming. As you can see here, this is a random live stream from a band, and you can see certain messages being put on screen. This is the chat. This was innovative at the time. Like, this allowed interactability that just wasn't present on other websites like Twitch and YouTube. She would stream herself there, barely knowing how to say hello or thank you, but she'd actually end up getting a lot of attention, and she'd use Google Translate to translate the chat messages. According to her, this allowed her to become fluent in Japanese in just a year. At some point on stream, she would have ginger hair, and her entire chat started calling her Asuka, the character from the anime Evangelion. And of course, when I say chat, I mean over 1,000 concurrent viewers, which is ridiculous, by the way. Just so you understand, 1,000 concurrent viewers on Twitch today in 2024 would put you in the top 0.06% of all streamers. But back in 2010, that was insane. I can't even fathom how crazy that was. This prompted her to eventually apply to the label Victor Entertainment. She says she didn't even send a demo tape, a video, or even photos. In her opinion, it was a very naive try, but they still got back to her and was able to even join the idol group when she was only 16 years old on an entertainment visa. She had become a part of the Japanese idol group known as Tone Jewel and released 3 different albums. As you can see, this is on Amazon Music and she's right there on the right. There was even a Crunchyroll article written about the band back in 2012. And funnily enough, you can see Tone Jewel, a high school girls' idol unit, consists of 2 Japanese and 1 Australian. It's because Japanese don't know Austria as a country. They think whenever someone says Austria, they're referring to Australia. She ended up leaving Tone Jewel in 2014, 2 years after joining, due to visa issues. But during those 2 years, she managed to do quite a few fan meetups, meeting up with fans and getting to know them. This is where Japanese idol culture comes in. An idol is typically someone who sings and does other things like acting or dancing, but they're also seen as a role model, as someone who's perfect. They can't make mistakes. And their private lives are typically very tightly controlled by their agencies. They barely can do anything. The slightest scandal, even them dating someone, would be cause for concern enough to ruin their entire careers. Their demographics are typically, the men you see here, people who are single and who have good money. This means that the idol culture is indeed seen as controversial when it comes to certain areas. The idea here is that you're building a strong parasocial relationship with your fans. To some, this means business. To others, this means taking advantage of them. What makes it even more controversial is that some idols will take it a step further, and during fan meetups or when they're with fans, they will straight up tell them, "I love you." This, in turn, will create extremely obsessive fans, people who will want to give you all their money and spread word about you to everyone. But it also has downsides, like stalkers. Now, what doesn't help is that there are cases of idols straight up marrying their fans. Like, this was a big story back in 2023. This idol, this 21-year-old idol, married this 27-year-old man who met her when she was 17. This only emboldens people more to think, oh, I have a chance with my idol. It happens all the time. Now, Keekihime did not use any of these cheap tricks. When she would do fan meetups, she would never tell anyone that she loved them or would want to marry them. She was just very nice and cordial. But unfortunately, that's all it takes sometimes for someone to be obsessive about you. She would typically have fan meetups with her friend, and there wouldn't be more than 10 people. They were fairly small. She had great experiences getting to meet these people, really appreciating the fact that they would go out of their way just to meet up with her. But there was one fan in particular, someone who seemed normal at first, but would end up tormenting her for the next 10 years of her life. This guy. This guy right here would initially be normal according to her. He was just another fan. But after meeting up with her, he would start to develop some very mentally ill attitudes. He would start messaging her on social media and emailing her some very sudden confessions of love, saying things like, "I love you so much, and I know that you love me. I'm very well aware that you love me, so I want to meet up with you ASAP because I have some very urgent, important things to tell you." Now, at the time, of course, she was still trying to understand Japanese culture and the way to talk to people properly under certain situations. The girl was barely 18. This was very confusing to her, so she ignored it. She ended up going back home to Austria after leaving the idol group due to visa issues, but then eventually found her love of cosplaying and remembered the days where people would call her Asuka on live streams. This is when she'd make it a point to go back to Japan and participate in the cosplay culture there. But what was really unfortunate was that she could have never been able to predict or assess how mentally ill her stalker truly was. There would be multiple instances that would leave a mark on her mentally for the rest of her life. The first one was 2 years after she had left the idol group. She was still under 20 years old according to her, and she wanted to go to Comiket. Comiket stands for Comic Market in English, and it's the largest fan convention in the world. And while it mostly focuses on self-published books or doujins, it's also very famous for its cosplaying scene, where some of the biggest on the planet go to show off their costumes. And since Keekihime wanted to get into cosplaying seriously and loved Japan, Comiket was a match made in heaven for her. But the trip there ended up being more like the 7th layer of hell. She took a plane from Austria to Japan, and when she landed, she let her fans know that she was at the airport, and if anyone was there, she'd love to meet them. As Keekihime got off the plane and was in the airport, 2 fans met up with her, took pictures, had nice conversations. It was overall a great time. But then, as they were leaving, she saw a third fan in the distance. And this time, it was a familiar face. The same person who had spammed her on all her social media accounts, who had sent her countless emails, and who wouldn't let her go even when she went to Austria. Someone she hoped she'd never have to see again. Her stalker. Immediately, without any second thought, she took her baggage with her and walked in the opposite direction of where he was coming from. She kept walking and walking, going up the escalator, down the escalator, one side of the airport to the other side of the airport. He kept following her and he wasn't even trying to hide it. At this point, she was getting desperate, and who wouldn't be? She needed to get on a train to leave the airport and go to where she wants to go. But she didn't want him to know which train she's taking so that he can follow her there too, potentially to where she's staying. Keekihime knew that this guy was not going to stop following her no matter what, so she went to the police station in the airport to hopefully scare him off. But even as she was speaking to 2 police officers at the front of the station, he still did not stop and was still heading towards her as she was speaking to the officers. But thankfully, since she speaks fluent Japanese, the officers understood what she meant immediately, and they separated both of them in 2 different rooms at the station. Now, at this point, she finally got a moment of peace. She was safe. And while she was hoping that she was going to feel safe even after leaving the station, she was about to face a very grim reality. We only know what happened from her point of view, of course, since the stalker hasn't really told us his side of the story. But the police essentially said, hey, listen, we understand this sucks, but our advice is that you just don't go to Comiket. And of course, she was shocked. She was like, wait, what? That's the solution for me to get screwed over? Can't you do anything? And the police said, no, he didn't actually commit a crime. And until he does, we can't do anything. This was Keekihime's first experience with the Japanese police, and it was disappointing to say the least. She wasn't going to let the stalker win. So she told the police, you know what? I'm gonna go to Comiket anyway. She left to go take her train while the stalker was still at the police station before he was released too. So thankfully she was able to take her train without him following her, but her concern was that he was going to show up at Comiket. A day passes and before you know it, she is at Comiket walking around the expo. She put on her costume, was getting her pictures taken by photographers, talking to fans, but of course a part of her was nervous over the fact that the stalker knew she was there. Then suddenly, 2 police officers she'd never met before came up to her. It turns out that the officers from the airport had sent these 2 people to check up on her. But the only description they gave them was that she was a foreigner, so they just walked around the whole expo and found her. She appreciated that. And you know what? It turned out that the stalker had not come to the expo. It seemed like he was spooked from the incident at the airport. This made her hopeful, thinking that, you know what, he probably got scared. Now that he saw the police in action, he would never dare to do this again. I wish that she was right, but of course, it was wrong. He wouldn't stop there. Around 2 years passed by since the airport incident, and this time we're in the Tokyo game show and Keekihime is cosplaying as usual. She would, as always, meet up with fans and photographers. At some point, one of these photographers was taking pictures of her, and as she was posing, she noticed, out of the corner of her eye, someone she never wanted to see again looking at her straight from the crowd. Her stalker. At this point, she was nervous, and why wouldn't she be? She still tried her best to pose for the picture though, and as the photographer was checking to see if the pictures turned out well, the stalker slowly walked towards her and kept getting closer and closer to her. She froze in place, not knowing what to do, and before she could even think, he lunged at her and went for the kiss. Thankfully, at that point, she reacted very quickly, dodged it, and kicked him. According to her, after the kick, he was very shocked. He had a look on his face that confirmed pretty much to 100% accuracy that he was fully expecting her to reciprocate. He genuinely thought in his own delusions that she was going to kiss him back. The kick left him so shocked that he ended up leaving her alone, thankfully, but she was still very marked. You know, at this point, when you see the same person over and over, when that person keeps sending you weird emails, even when you're in Austria, outside of Japan, when they're willing to wait for you at the airport, this starts to really play tricks on your mind. You know, you never trust anyone again. You never want to get out of your house. It's rough. A year passes by and we're now in 2020, the pandemic is in full swing. Keekihime had unfortunately moved to Japan during that year on a 1-year visa, hoping to do more cosplays and attend more events, but unfortunately, since it was the pandemic and lockdowns were in order, there were no cosplay events for a long time. She ended up going back to Austria without doing much. Until Summer Comiket 2024, the first event she can finally go to that is cosplay related. She was very excited because it's been a very long time since she even went to Japan to do this. She talked about it on Twitter, how she's about to go and is preparing for the very hot weather, and even teased the character she was going to cosplay. This was her in the event, and in this tweet she says, "Finish changing, I'll go die on rooftop now." Speaking of the rooftop at Comiket, this is one of the most iconic places to take pictures in cosplays. If you've watched any animes that relate to cosplaying, you have seen something similar to this. It gets crowded very quickly, and for Summer Comiket 2024, they had guidelines in place. They had designated many different zones separated by barriers that cosplayers could go into, take their pictures and leave without blocking oncoming traffic. This is exactly what Keekihime would do. She would get on the rooftop in the morning before it got too crowded, took some pictures, and then went back down. At that point though, she was being contacted by many photographers and fans that she hadn't seen in a very long time, so the rooftop made the most sense to be on. So even though it was really hot, she made this tweet right here saying, "Little break, spent 2 hours on the roof, I go again maybe in 1 hour," letting everyone know that she'll be there. As you can see, this is her on the rooftop with a photographer taking pictures of her, and she has her little signature suitcase with a sign linking her socials. This is something that she's been doing for a long time. This is the queue of all the photographers, so as you can see, she is fairly popular. At this point, she was still not in the designated areas. She headed there next, and while she thought that the only concerns for the day are going to be her posing and the heat, she was dead wrong, as she ended up being extremely marked and confused, as well as the hundreds of people around her attending Comiket after witnessing what happened next. She went ahead and got into her designated area. As you can see, there's a barrier separating her from the rest of the crowd. A familiar man that had been haunting her for over 10 years showed up right behind her. She had just posed in this area. The photographer had just barely pulled out his camera ready to take the first picture. This is when her stalker would jump the barrier behind her. She felt this happen and thought to herself, wow, this person must be in a hurry if they had to jump the barrier like that, but she was too focused on posing for the camera. And then before she knew it, she can barely recall this, she was grabbed from the back, tightly, squeezing across her entire body. Her stalker had effectively jumped on her. He is significantly bigger than her and had her completely trapped in his arms. What's even more creepy and disgusting about this picture is that you can see him clearly grinning, probably enjoying this. She was absolutely caught by surprise here and was screaming her lungs out. She said that she was screaming so loud that the people 200 meters away from her could hear her. This was her worst fear come true. According to her, it felt like an eternity, but he ended up holding her maybe for around a full 10 seconds. Eyewitnesses around her report that they were also very confused, thinking, wait, is this a friend of hers? Like, what's going on? But after those 10 seconds had passed, they understood, oh no, like she's screaming her lungs out, this is not normal. They attempted to wrestle him off of her, right? He was holding her so tight, multiple people had to wrestle him off of her because he wouldn't let go. And at that point, she was hyperventilating, tearing up, crying. She was practically having a panic attack. This is a recording of the aftermath. After he had groped her the way he did, this is what happens. Watch, then I'll explain. So at this point, people are confused, they're questioning him like, yo, what's going on right now? And she tells everyone that, hey, this is my stalker, he's been doing this for years. And this guy has the gall to act shocked. He says things like, but I've been emailing you, I've been sending you messages all the time. I'm just a very big fan, we know each other. Making himself out to be innocent, like he's shocked that she would react this way. People could tell things were getting serious, so they cleared up the area at the end there. That's what happened. After this incident, Keekihime ended up tweeting this, saying, "By the way, I'm done for the day with photos, thanks for coming. I got assaulted by an old stalker and had a panic attack in front of hundreds of people, so honestly I feel disgusting and I don't know what to think. I will, unless it's illegal, release a photo of his face later with more details." Someone, of course a smartass on Twitter, we love those, says, "Recommend filing a police report, take care," as if she didn't try doing that before, right? And then she says, "I talked to the police, they said I gotta go to the embassy." So that's exactly what happened according to her. She made a Twitter space 55 minutes long in which she explained everything from start to finish, and it's the main source that was used for this entire video. She details how the staff of Comiket were fairly supportive, but when she said she wanted to call the police, they said you have to do that outside the expo. She definitely wanted to talk to the police about this because she quite literally got assaulted, but she opted to finish taking pictures with a photographer she hadn't seen for years first, before talking to the police. She said the police officer she spoke to was very understanding and very nice to her, but he pretty much told her what she had said in her post. He said, "We can't do anything because you're not a resident of Japan," and that she should go to her embassy, to the Austrian embassy, to report this. That way, when and if it happens again, she can go to the police and say, "Hey, this happened," and my embassy can confirm that I already reported it once before. Very weird, wouldn't you say? Article 208 of the Penal Code, Act No. 45 of 1907, clearly states when a person assaults another person without injuring the other person, which is exactly what happened. This was assault in every way. The person is punished by imprisonment for not more than 2 years, a fine of not more than 300,000 yen, penal detention, or a petty fine. At the airport, when they had put them both in different rooms, they had taken his information. And now this has happened again. Some people theorize that police is just too lazy to do their jobs. Definitely probable. But the more this happens to her, the more we understand why this is the dark side of Japan, why stalkers are able to roam so freely in the country, because there are practically no consequences. That's why the internet, more specifically the Japanese internet, has decided to take this into their own hands. Now, I don't know how, but they found the stalker's Twitter profile on the same day. His original Twitter account was Phoenix Rick, but it doesn't exist anymore because he changed his name immediately to Rick Phoenix, as if that's going to change anything. He also privated his account. People are on to him and they want to dispense their own sense of justice since the police doesn't want to do a single thing. They even found his alt account called Mirror Rick. They're finding everything about this guy. This post right here found out more about him, saying, according to a certain source, the stalker of Keekihime at Comiket, or rather the person who sexually assaulted Keekihime, was a man known as Rick, who was famous for making appearances in dark baseball, dark walking, and other events, then running away without paying. And as you can see, he's right here with a different haircut. So overall, a great productive member of society, as you might guess from an obsessive stalker like this. Keekihime ended all this by saying, "With that, the topic is done. I'll move on, but knowledge is power." But she still tweeted the next day that she felt very dead inside, mentioning how her cat sitters sent her a video of her cats and that she misses them so dearly, wanting to go back home just to see them. And was asked by a fan, "Hey, would it be possible to make an emergency trip back home even for a day or two?" And then she said, "Absolutely not, sadly. Just hoping the days go by fast." So this not only ruined her day at Comiket, but might have just ruined her entire Japan trip. And it definitely serves to highlight not just the dangers of content creation due to stalkers, but it also highlights the dark side of Japan, this stalking epidemic that just seems to be very rampant, more so than usual, due to not only aspects of the culture that encourage it, but the fact that the police don't seem to take it seriously until it gets serious, aka someone gets hurt, which shouldn't happen. It shouldn't get to that point. But in any case, I wish Keekihime the best. I hope she never has to deal with that stalker or any other stalker ever again, and that more light can be shed on this unfortunate aspect found in some areas in Japanese culture, which is just being a very weird stalker. Of course, I still want to acknowledge that this is the minority of people in Japan, but it is rampant enough for it to be cause for concern, especially if you're a woman traveling abroad there by yourself. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and please stay safe out there, okay? Love you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Mwah.